All right, good morning, y'all. Good morning and welcome to the Imagine Austin Speaker Series. We have a very special speaker today, and today's a very special day for Imagine Austin. This marks the 7th year since the adoption of the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan on June 14th in this very room. So happy birthday to Imagine Austin. And the speaker series is important to Imagine Austin because at its heart, it's trying to grow the implementation of the comprehensive plan through shared dialogue and mutual learning. So these are very special events that we get to host. And we have a very special guest with us today. We'll be talking about the Census 2020 and our expectations and challenges that we might face in Central Texas. I have the great honor of introducing our esteemed presenter for the day, the City of Austin Demographer Ryan Robinson, We'll get plenty of opportunity for applause for Ryan today. Ryan is an Austin native and has been with the City of Austin, working for the city for almost 30 years now. So Ryan is an incredible presenter. He has so much knowledge about the census and many other subjects. And he's borne witness to the many changes that Austin has seen over the past decades, and will walk us through some of the changes and challenges that we might expect in the next. Our format today, we're going to begin with Ryan's presentation, and then we'll be taking questions via index cards. So I hope that you got some of these coming in. If not, we have several staff members walking around, and you can get some index cards. We also have pens, and we'll be collecting those about halfway through the presentation, so you can start writing your questions. And we ask that you please fill out a survey on your way out. You can grab one of those at the desk. We can help you get one as well. So, without any further ado, I would like to welcome the one and only Mr. Ryan Robinson.
Thank you very much. Sam Tedford did a presentation yesterday which set the bar, and it's the student has become the master. So, thank you for that. I am excited to be here. I am Ryan Robinson. This is the Imagine Austin Speaker Series, and this topic is near and dear to my heart. This is my 4th decennial, right? The very first thing I did when I came on board in January of 1990 was mess around with a list of housing units by census block, and we were in the thick of it then, and we're in the thick of it today. If I do say so myself, this is a pretty fascinating topic, right? Because it's trying to count all of the growth that we've experienced. And that's one of the points I want to make before I dig into particulars about the decennial. The enormous amount of population and job growth that we've experienced across Central Texas. And the growth has been diverse. It's been complex. It's been lots of new addresses added. It's been lots of new living arrangements that we didn't have. Our homeless population is bigger than it's ever been. It's more dispersed, and that was a good point. So we have got a heck of a challenge on our hands. And so my task, my kind of goal is to try and make that connection between our enormous growth, the complexity of that growth, and the difficulty of counting that. In light of new methods of gathering information, right? In light of a pretty stinky environment in terms of fear and intimidation, right? It's hard enough to conduct a decennial census. It's hard enough to count everyone. I mean, just think about that, just counting every single person. But in this environment, and I'll expand what I mean by that, this is going to be, I think, one of the most daunting decennial efforts in modern history. So with that, let's jump into the data. My presentation themes are pretty straightforward. Enormous regional population growth across Central Texas, race and ethnicity, the importance of the decennial census, hard to count populations, the citizenship question, and new methods of data collection for 2020, and conclusions and strategies. All right, to start off with, I want to look at state level growth. 20% of total population growth from 2010 to 2018 for the entire United States occurred in Texas. And we were the biggest absolute growth state last decade, but this is really showing how disproportionate the distribution of that growth is. Texas stands to possibly gain 3 congressional seats. We will see. But that's sort of where I want to start, is just at the state level, the enormous amount of growth. And then let's look at a couple of county maps. Every time I make these maps, I'm amazed at how many counties continue to lose population. And yet, to me, and I'm going to show you this, is absolute growth and then percent change. In terms of absolute growth, it's the Texas cities that are growing. The big Texas cities are adding the most population. And you can see that clearly. Midland, Odessa kind of participates in a total, but it's really Austin, San Antonio, Houston, and DFW. And you can see the valley as well. But look how different this next map is, and it's going to be percent change as opposed to total. And you really see the suburban counties show up. And that makes sense because the suburban populations are smaller, and so they're growing at a faster rate. You really see the oil patch show up on the percent change map. And many of us wonder how long that will continue to grow. The individual county listing, look at Harris County. That has gained over 500,000 persons in just that 7-year period. And Travis, you can see as well. And not just that, but look at Bexar County, Williamson, and Hayes. So you've got Austin and San Antonio MSA counties well represented on that list. All right, metropolitan Austin, which is the 5-county area of Williamson, Travis, Hayes, Bastrop, and Caldwell. You can see that population history. It's pretty amazing. At the regional level, we continue to double our population every 20 years. A couple of factoids to hang on that. We're up to 2.2 million persons as of 2019. That's a net gain of roughly 450,000 since 2010. On track to reach and surpass the 3 million mark by 2030, and that's with a slowed growth rate. That's coming off of that doubling rate. If we were to continue to double, which I don't think we will, I think we're going to slow a little bit at the metropolitan level. And so that's even with a slowed growth. And the city itself, I think, might just make it to 1 million by 2020. That's probably my ultimate performance measure, right? Every 10 years, the truth comes out, and that's why I want a good count, right? That's why it's so important to know where we are as a city. All right, that's a ranking of large metropolitan areas, and for the 8th year in a row, Austin is the fastest growing large MSA in the country. And by large, I'm going to define that as up and above 1 million. And I think it's also important that it's been 8 consecutive years, right? We didn't really have a housing bubble. We were last in, first out of the Great Recession. And so by 2011 and 2012, I mean, we were rocking and rolling. But places in California were still on their knees. Places that had a housing bubble were still recovering. We were creating jobs at a very, very rapid rate. And 7 years ago, were more relatively affordable than we are today, especially compared to the more expensive coastal cities where much of our workforce continues to come from. All right, I'm going to borrow a couple of graphs from the chamber. Chris Ramser, who does a fabulous job over there with Beverly Kerr. I want to point out that the vast majority of our growth comes from net in-migration. An increasing share from natural increase, which is births over deaths, but look at that top piece of that blue bar. That's the net domestic migration, and then the yellowy orange is international migration. That's a way to snapshot it for the last year. So 70%, and it bounces between 70 and 65%, the share of the growth that comes from migration, and then natural increase. What's interesting about this is for the most part, we were pretty confident that we know about 151 individuals are added per day, but we don't know how many folks leave. That's the hard part. And so we know that we're netting about that 105, but the point I'm trying to make is you could have 170 move in and 40 move out. That's the piece that's hard to know, but we know how much we net. And this is simply a ranking of big MSAs, and Austin ranks at the top in terms of its percent of its total population that's basically arrived here in the last 7 years. And so that's pretty amazing. Just think about the entire city and the metro area. There are that many newcomers. And that's a simple way to talk about where all this migration comes from. You can see that still just over 50% of that migration comes from other parts of the state, but that's changing, right? 15 years ago, that share from the rest of the state was larger. At some point, I expect that to go below 50% as Austin becomes more and more of a destination in and of itself, right? People migrate in very stepwise fashion, maybe from Los Angeles to Houston and then to Austin, or from New York to Dallas and then to Austin. And yes, there's California, and people like to hate on the Californians, but I say come one, come all. We're an open city. All right, zip level growth and decline. This is a series of maps that I really enjoyed making, and before I color it with growth and a choropleth, I just want to show you, I'm going to basically be mapping the I-35 corridor. So Bexar County in the southwest all the way up to Bell County, and this is growth at the zip level in a 7-year period. And it's pretty amazing that high growth, for the most part, is really hugging the I-35 corridor. Not entirely, but also a couple of things to point out. Look at Burnett County in the upper piece of that map. I have expected the inclusion of Burnett County into our metropolitan area at some point as Marble Falls continues to suburbanize and grow. And if Burnett County, if 25% of their commuting workforce is headed into the urbanized area, they'll be included. But look how Burnett County, the southern piece of it, is growing, but the northern piece is actually losing population. And so and counties are included in either wholly or not. You can see Bell County, that's growth, of course, associated with Fort Hood. And then I point out Hays and Comal counties. I am convinced that Austin and San Antonio are becoming more connected, right? For two cities that are only 85 miles apart from each other, there has been very little historic interaction. I think somebody had a master's thesis once where they opened up a San Antonio paper and counted how many references there were to Austin and then did the same with the Austin paper. And of course, San Antonio talks about us a lot more than we talk about them. But I think that we're, and I'm not suggesting that we're going to become DFW because we're not that close, but at some point we're going to basically be this big, solid, continuous urban creature. And many of you have heard me say this, my heart was broken when Lone Star Rail was taken off the table. I think that would be a brilliant way to stitch the two regions together. I mean, imagine getting on a train and 40 minutes later seeing the Alamo and out the window. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on the Austin MSA to give you a slightly better look at that. The growth in Hays and Comal County is amazing, and I guess the point I wanted to make is that we expected Hays and Comal to grow, but not as much as they have. And I think it's because this Austin and San Antonio sort of conjunto thing that's emerging. And you can still see a few zip codes that have loss. Those losses are not deep, but they're enough to register on the scale. All right, race and ethnicity. That is our most recent race and ethnicity pie from 2017 American Community Survey data. We'll get an update to this in September from the one-year data. To me, it's pretty amazing that our Asian share of total now exceeds the African-American share of total at the city level. We had been predicting this for quite a while, and it's simply the function of a rapidly growing and expanding Asian community, which is very diverse, and a modest growth from the African-American community. Thankfully, though, for those of you who have been following this, we are back in the positive territory in terms of our African-American population, because from 2000 to 2010, we actually experienced a net loss. Our growth is back in the positive at the city level and has been modest and steady at the metropolitan level. Hispanic at 34.2, that's interesting. That's actually just below the 2010 level. And so, there are probably a dozen reasons why that's happening, but Hispanic has leveled off, and that has surprised me. I really expected that Hispanic share of total to continue to climb, maybe even reaching the low 40s. It might still do that, but there are just so many sort of cultural and social environmental factors at work that I think are keeping that share where it is. Non-Hispanic white dipped below 50%, probably around 04 or 05, and has kind of stayed there since. So we become a majority minority community, joining every other large American city in that stance. Now, just for fun, I guess, or educational purpose, I'm going to jump back to 1990. And you can see how very different we were as a city, with a big, huge non-Hispanic white share, larger African-American, and a much, much smaller Hispanic and much smaller Asian. Now, this is a way, and it's 1 year back, so I don't have the 2017, I have the 2016. The very top bar is simply a replication of that pie chart. But look how our race and ethnicity changes as you move through those age cohorts. Our oldest Austinites, 66% of those folks are non-Hispanic white. Our youngest Austinites, right, look at that 0 to 9, 47.6, almost a Hispanic majority in those youngest categories. This is also, I think, the way the state of Texas looks. And before I jump ahead and start talking about hard-to-count communities, just fix this graph in your mind, because especially those younger groups, that's where our hard-to-count people are. Young children, people who might be linguistically isolated, foreign-born immigrant population. There's just a lot embedded in that. And then this is the graph I wanted to show you how very diverse our Asian population is. And this is partially a function of the way the Census Bureau defines it, right? From Pakistan to Japan, that is Asian. And you can imagine, I mean, there's not much social similarity between an Asian Indian household and a Vietnamese household. By the way, that Asian Indian at 34.4, that's the highest Indian share of an Asian community across the entire country. The number 2 city is Charlotte, North Carolina. And so I think that's fascinating. And we've seen enormous growth out of that South Asian component. All right, counting all of this diverse growth will be a challenge. And that's where I want to try and make the bridge. Census 2020 mandated by the United States Constitution every 10 years since 1790. Of course, the next census is now less than a year away. And while it's managed by the Bureau, they need local help. And that's where our complete count committee, our complete count effort. I see faces in the crowd that helped us in 2010. I hope you'll come back and pitch in for 2020. The Constitution says that the census will count every person, right? And that's critical because that's the foundation of one person, one vote. It's the foundation of why adding a citizenship question might be controversial. All right, census is crucial. And I meant to say at the beginning of this episode of the Imagine Austin Speaker Series is being brought to you by the number 800 billion, right? $800 billion a year is distributed. It's pretty amazing, based on that decennial figure. Of course, reapportionment of congressional districts among the states. We're expected to gain possibly 3 seats, and then redistricting in the State House, Senate. And for the first time ever, right, we'll be redistricting City of Austin council districts because we haven't had them. Of course, we had them in the 50s, but that doesn't really count. And that's going to be interesting. And, of course, we'll also redistrict and redraw Travis County Commissioners Court. All right, there's a simple map showing what states might gain, what states might lose. And it's hard to imagine being in a state that would potentially lose a couple of seats, right? In Texas, it's always been about gaining. All right, this really is just a subset of where all that money goes. I guess my favorite on this list is Head Start. I've seen that personally and how that works and how it helps. But it's amazing how many pieces of social programs are totally dependent on that federal money. All right, so the Government Accounting Office says that 2020 is at risk, and here's why they say that. Reduced overall funding for 2020 compared to 2010. And that's crazy, right? Because our population is bigger, it's far more diverse, it's going to be far more difficult to count. We're going to try new methods of collection, and it's being funded at a level below where it was in 2010, so that's a shame. Including new and largely untested, right? That's key. It's not just the fact that we're going to use online and telephone response options, which is great, but it's untested, right? The folks at the Bureau love to test their stuff. You know, they want to go out and they want to make sure that, okay, we're going to do, and in 2010, I think there were 4 individual field tests. This time there's been barely 1, and it was done in Providence, Rhode Island, which is a good place to do it. But we're just out kind of on thin ice with some of these less than tested techniques. Fewer and less well-trained census field workers for non-response follow-up. The Census Bureau loves its acronyms, and this one is NORFU. I'm not quite sure how you get NORFU out of NRFU, but that's it. But importantly, that's where undercount lives, is this non-response follow-up, and I hope to make that point a little more clearly. If everyone were to respond, right, that would be the way to count folks. But when you have to go knocking on the door, that's where undercount lives. All right, significant reductions in budget for education outreach, last-minute addition of untested citizenship question. All right, our own complete count effort is well underway. There are 2 groups, a steering committee and a leadership council, and we had our kickoff on April 1st. And just as an example of kind of the folks that are on that group, Christina Tinsun Ramirez she's the CEO of Jolt. She did our call to action. I was ready to storm the Bastille after I heard her talk. I mean, it was so energizing. Along with Carmen Yanis, Paul Cruz, Reverend Joseph Parker, Bijoy Goswami, Molly Beth Malcolm, Judge Nick Chu. It's a good group. And as my colleague Marian Sanchez has sort of taught me, the purpose is that those individuals will open a door for us that then might lead to 2 or 3 other doors, right? And so when you're when you're trying to get to the hard count communities, you're not going to just go straight up and like say, hi, we're here. We want you to really participate in the census. You're going to have to somehow use trusted voices and really be culturally sensitive to get to the hard to count. And that's a graphic by my counterpart, Dee Sechstein at Travis County. In his perfect world, the city and the county are sort of at the center of regional complete count efforts. We're not saying we're control freaks or want to dictate everything, but we want to be more coordinated than we were in 2010. And I think we're well on our way. We're going to have another meeting at the end of the month with our leadership council, and then we'll probably give them a break on the summer and get back together in September. And it will really be a focus of taking that complete count committee and creating a subcommittee structure. And the subcommittee structure will be based on hard to count populations. All right, I like this graphic from the Bureau because they're beginning to sort of talk about, okay, why are you hard to count? And so the 4 areas here: hard to locate, hard to contact, hard to persuade, hard to interview, and then that overlap. But participation hindered by language barriers and access, right? That's what I call linguistic isolation. Housing units not in our frame, or persons wanting to remain hidden. That's more difficult than you might think. I mean, one of the big programs we've been doing is shipping lists of addresses to the Bureau for the last year because we've added so many new addresses, right? And so it's this big kind of, if they have a good list of addresses, which I would say we do because of 911, because of our 911 system, we got, and I know there are a couple of you in the crowd who know what I'm talking about. That's not really the problem. It's getting everyone at the address to respond. And 2 others, highly mobile, people experiencing homelessness. That's, of course, going to be a gigantic challenge for us. And then this other group, suspicious of the government, low levels of engagement. All right, so this is a simple listing of from 2010, our mail-back response rate. It's not how many people were counted. It's simply how many people responded with a paper questionnaire. And then, of course, it was that gap that we then had to chase, pursue, and part of the non-response follow-up. And Travis and City did pretty well. That's the City of Austin sitting in a list. I never quite understood why Seattle was at the very top of that list. I would have put Seattle more closely kind of in our realm. But importantly, this is a map of those response rates. I've stared at this for a fair amount of time, and those dark blue census tracts are areas that responded up and above 80%. So those are areas that are not difficult to count by any means. It's the areas that had lower response rates. So I'm going to take that map and simply flip it and point out those tracts that had below a 70% rate. Now, not that every single individual that's hard to count lives in one of those polygons, but to give you guys a sense of how many people do live in those polygons, 400,000 is the population total for the summary of those tracts that are colored orange. And you can see a couple of things. You can see there's the University of Texas being covered. There, much of East Austin, Southeast Austin, our ports of entry, if you will. Those are all included in areas that are hard to count. All right, so let's just list these folks, right? Young children, age under 5. It's kind of interesting, but you'll hear over and over from the folks at the Bureau and other demographers that it's just something about young children. And maybe it's, if you have a newborn and it's not quite, 1 yet, they go, well, maybe we shouldn't count him because he's not 1 yet. I mean, I don't know, but and of course they can't speak, for themselves, and maybe that's also why they're undercounted. But they are a big-time undercount population, and we will do everything we can to get those in the response. College students, right? Now, this is kind of an information game more than anything. It comes from confusion, but it's basically, when your day is done on April 1, that's where we want you to be counted. And the confusion comes from if your folks live in Houston or Dallas, that's, well, my folks are going to count me. No, we want very much to count where they put their head on the pillow on April 1st. The homeless, by definition, hard to find and hard to count. I was having a conversation before I started. Right, everyone who lives here realizes that our homeless population is a whole lot bigger than it used to be. It's more complex. It's a more diverse population, and it's more spread out. Right, and the Census Bureau expects to count these folks in one night. Right, and that's really asking a lot. In 2010, we came up with what we thought would be a pretty good idea: have a Willie Nelson concert, give out simple things, and bring the homeless in and count them that way. And the Bureau said, no way, because they are into the Procrustean bed. They want to count everyone the same way in every corner of the country. I get that, but it doesn't make sense because some communities like ours, Los Angeles, other vibrant American cities, have got these enormous homeless populations. They're going to be very, very difficult to count. What we will give them in February is a map of, as best we can come up with, of camps and gathering places. But this is, it's just one of those pieces of our community that we know is going to be undercounted. It's just sort of, by how much. But we will have a subcommittee that will be on this. We'll focus on it. We will put a lot of effort into it. I'm hopeful that we can do a better job than we did in 2010. Non-English speaking, like clearly residents who might be somewhat linguistically isolated. Certainly for us, the big three are Chinese, Vietnamese, and Spanish. And then immigrants, including the undocumented. And one of the lessons, again, that I'm learning kind of this time around is that immigrant families can often be mixed families. And what I mean by that is there might be an uncle who has a green card, a daughter who was born here and is a citizen, and then maybe an aunt who is here without any documentation at all. And so it's this very complex sort of living arrangement that it's not just whole immigrant families, but even the association of that, those folks are going to be hard to count. LGBTQ persons and the disabled are hard to count. And then persons who distrust the government. And that population is bigger than ever before, right? All right, Travis County, and this is sort of it's not perfect, but it's my attempt to try and drive home how much overlap there is between the hard to count populations and communities. All right, that's a couple of maps. Under age 5, share of total population. Again, it's just going to help us determine where to put our outreach efforts. And then the group above age 5, there's a program, and I don't have a slide for it, and I wish I did, a program it used to be called Census in Schools, and now I believe it's called Statistics in Schools. It's a fabulous way of reaching families by giving materials to grade schoolers who then take that home to their parents. And it is one of the most effective methods ever, because that's also a technique that in many cases the children will be doing the translating for the parents, right? They're informing and they're able. And so that's something we're going to take huge advantage of. If I didn't mention it, Paul Cruz, the superintendent, Kelly Crook, who just retired from Del Valle, she'll be missed. But we're trying to connect to the school systems to get at this distribution technique. The one thing about our college student population is pretty concentrated. We will designate ambassadors at college campuses and, of course, use folks like Dr. Molly Beth Malcolm to get at the ACC folks. That's gotten pretty good. I mean, now they send, blast emails, and there's a pretty good way to communicate with that. So I'm hopeful that we'll do a really good count of college students this time around. And then there's a map of foreign-born share of total. I've long thought of this map as sort of showing our ports of entry, if you will, for the foreign-born, and so we will be concentrating there in a big way. All right, here's the citizenship question, and this is what it's going to look like. And as I've shown this to groups, one of the very first things I hear is, "Oh, that's great. Where's the green card option?" Right? So, and this is something that Carmen Llanes has been, trying to tell me and talk about. Right? This isn't a legal status question. It's a binary yes or no. Are you a citizen? Are you not? And there might be some people who look at this and go, "What's the big deal?" Sure, I'm going to answer that. And then there are others of us who are pretty worried about this. Even if you're here with full documentation and you're foreign-born, I think this question is going to be pretty intimidating in light of the environment that we've been experiencing, and I think that we need to be honest and open about it. ICE has been very, very aggressive, right? They have created an environment of intimidation and fear, unlike anything that we had in 2010. I mean, even in 2010, we had a tacit understanding between the Census Bureau and the Immigration Service then. Again, it wasn't formal and official, but it was kind of like the Census Bureau said to the immigration folks, can you chill out for these 2 months while we try and count our population? And they said yes. I mean, and that's when I think about, wow, think about that cooperation between federal agencies. We are not going to have that level of cooperation this time around. And got back from a demographic conference last week with Sam, and there was a person from the Census Bureau, and they were really hesitant to talk about this. But somebody asked a question, and she almost kind of snapped. And the question, and you could tell that they've been thinking about it a lot. The question was, what are you going to do if you're an enumerator, a field enumerator, going out to do a non-response follow-up, and they become aware that they're being followed by an ICE agent? And the Census Bureau person immediately said, well, they've been told to stop working and go home. And so it was kind of a funny thing, because before she wasn't even going to talk about it, but then someone asked this question, and so they have really done some contingency scenarios. And again, I'm not trying to be melodramatic here, but I think it's a serious potential for a risk. All right, that, of course, is Javier Becerra, Attorney General with California. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because California is very concerned about an undercount. They have formed a statewide complete count committee. The state of Texas has not formed a complete count committee. And so, I mean, is that irony? I don't know what that is, but we're just sort of like, yeah, it's going to be a great count, full steam ahead. Whereas New York, Florida, California, they're doing elaborate outreach methods. I mean, and to have that upper level connection, right, as you guys know, when you're trying to do something, it means so much, right? And this is my good buddy Elijah Cummings. He's a little agitated. I mean, the story just keeps developing, right? This is a headline from 3 days ago where the president is going to assert executive privilege to keep them from being able to open up the actual details. Is just amazing. We will find out some Tuesday in June. I was hoping it was going to be the Tuesday that we just passed, what the Supreme Court has said. And I'm kind of backtracking, but the Supreme Court heard the oral arguments in, I believe, March. And then I went out to all the websites that sort of specialize in slicing and dicing the Supreme Court. I had been hopeful before that, but after I read those blogs, I came away really pretty pessimistic. However, there has been, a late development in just, again, it's almost kind of like a short story. This is Dr. Thomas Hofeller, who is a longtime Republican cartographer, strategist, gerrymanderer, who really kind of made a name for himself by extending the Nixon Southern strategy. He began to talk African-American congressmen into, hey, let me help you draw a stronger African-American district. And they went, that's actually a pretty good idea. But he had an ulterior motive. By creating these strong African-American districts, then the surrounding districts became whiter and more Republican. And so he really is sort of the guy, he's passed away and he's deceased now, who really began to create districts based on political affiliation. Again, the story is fascinating. He passed away. A daughter of his who was estranged was looking through his estate, trying to sort that out, and came upon a big gallon baggie with 40 hard drives in it. And so she's thinking, well, there might be something interesting on these hard drives, or flash drives. So she gave the flash drives to a common cause in North Carolina, and they opened it up, and sure enough, they found some really good stuff. But specific to this discussion, he did a study in 2015 that had been commissioned by a pretty conservative publication. I think it was the Washington Beacon. That's not quite right. Correct me if you guys know it. Basically, exploring the notion of, could you redraw U.S. congressional districts based not on total population, but what's known in the business as CVAP. CVAP is citizen voting age population. So think about how dramatically those districts would change. And again, you're not just drawing non-citizens out of it, you're drawing children out of it. which I think is a violation of one person, one vote. And yet that's what a section, not everyone, but a section within the Republican Party has long wanted to do that. This is another shot of him and the folks looking at this is a little video. I'm not going to play it, the surprising history of gerrymandering, who of course comes from Governor Gary Stewart, so it should be gerrymandering, but it's gerrymandering. Now, again, back to sort of the demographic point of why this is so potentially damaging. Right, the last time that the Census Bureau asked citizenship of every household was in 1950. Right, look how low the share of total foreign-born at the national level was. It was 6.9%, and it's an unfortunate piece of our history, but I think it's pertinent to this discussion. The federal government used block-level citizenship data in the 40s as part of their internment program as they rounded up Japanese families in California. So, you know, even aside from the notion of Title 13, which is all about keeping data private, it's the end result, right? If you had block-level citizenship data, think about the way we build apartment complexes today. They take up entire blocks, right? And so you would have a level of data detail, especially in light of the fact that our foreign-born share of total is at the national level is almost up to the high that we experienced in 2010. 2017, it's 13.7, and then for us, it's 18.7. Almost 1 in 5 Austinites is foreign-born. That's a map, a simple map of the United States of concentrations of foreign-born, and you could see, so, you know, imagine how that U.S. congressional district that map would change. Well, it would change seriously for South Florida, much of Texas, and much of California, and other pockets as well. All right, the citizenship question increases risk of undercount, so says January Advisors. I got this from Becky Passner, who at St. David's Foundation, who is a member of our Complete Count Committee. And it talks about this notion of more than 1 in 5 Texans lives with a non-citizen. And this gets back to my notion of the immigrant families and foreign-born families are mixed, and you can simply have a connection, and then Hispanic and Asian communities put at greater risk. That print is kind of small, and I apologize, but that biggest bar is Asian, and the one right below that is Hispanic. And so this is the point. It's not just a risk of an undercount, but it's a disproportionate undercount, right? It would be lumped up within certain communities. Some folks would be counted pretty closely. Other folks could be severely undercounted. New methods of data collection. For the first time ever, we're going to use the internet. And that, of course, introduces a whole nother family of challenges. Safety. Remember when Obamacare website kept crashing? You know, I mean, I don't want to imagine that, but I bet that's going to be a challenge. And when we've brought that up, the Bureau says, no, we got it figured out. Yeah. But you can tell they're scared to death of that happening. And so they expect most responses to come online. You can still do it old-fashioned. You know, you can wait for your questionnaire, or you can do it by phone. The phone technique is going to be good because they're going to have, I believe, 53 different languages available. But of course, my complaint is, how do you get to that point? Because you're going to be sent a letter or a postcard in early March in only English and Spanish. So, I mean, if I'm an Urdu speaker and I don't speak English or Spanish, I'm still a little concerned how we connect those folks to this diverse phone tree. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say about that. You will. So if it's a normal sort of household with an address, you'll receive a letter in early March. You'll have an ID, and so you could use that ID and answer the census on your smartphone. Micro-targeting, multiple modes. Again, and even without that ID, you'll be able to respond using verification, address verification. And then I'm going to close and we'll open up for questions, just sort of some timelines. Early March, that kind of mid-March, every household will receive an invitation. Some will also receive a questionnaire. And then there'll be this sort of reminder sequence of mail-outs that go. But if you respond online, you'll kind of stop receiving reminders, and you will not receive a visit. I think that's the end of my material. In fact, before I almost said her name, I want to thank the producer of this series, Kathleen Fox. my good friend and colleague. She does this very, very well. So thanks for sponsoring me. And
Thank you, Ryan.
One more, and I apologize for saying that. A couple little comments. These are just repeat of what I've said. Census 2020 has been underfunded. This shortage will be felt most acutely in their outreach and national scale media campaign. That's where we'll come in, right? We'll have to pick up that slack. Last minute addition of an untested citizenship question could be a problem. And then finally, although the new use of internet and telephone response options could prove beneficial, logistical manifestations could prove unpredictable. Okay, I'll stop there and let's get into some questions.
I have about 25 questions. I'll try to, well, hopefully we'll get through all of them, but it's first come, first serve. And again, they're on topic regarding the census and what you just discussed.
Great.
The first one is mostly about the citizenship question. I have 5 of them. Do folks who are concerned about having the question on the census recommend that the census takers skip that question regardless of their status?
So, and the way I'm interpreting that is what's the strategy for citizenship? Is that or am I putting too much into that? Because we've thought about that.
I think it's about people who are not citizens or concerned. Yeah.
So let me make sure. So if you don't answer that, is that the question? Like you answer,
Yes.
it's 11 questions, you answer the first 10 and you skip the 11th? So we've asked that of the Bureau, and they've never given us, to my opinion, a really good answer, but I think that means that you could receive a visit. And we've even, and I think this is worth saying it, we've even thought about strategies like tell everyone to answer yes, tell everyone to answer no, tell everyone to skip it, right? And I don't think that we're going to be able to sort of formally go with a strategy like that. I don't think we're going to be able to boycott the question because, again, you'll be opening up the possibility. Basically, an incomplete form could result in a visit from an enumeration person.
What is the legal liability of not answering a question on the census or just not filling out the census and saying, I'm not going to participate?
Yeah. So we are legally obligated. I don't think anyone has ever been prosecuted for not, but that's a good question, and maybe send it up to the Census Bureau. But yeah, we are supposed to answer. It's also, of course, part of our civic duty. So I don't know if I can take that to the full degree. I'm not sure what the penalty would be, but I do know that there is we're technically supposed to answer it.
Okay. And does not answering the citizenship question invalidate the survey, i.e., can people not answer this question and still be counted?
I don't know. And that's, again, we've gone round and round with the Bureau trying to get a hard answer. And they might also not be completely decided. I mean, my sense of if you work at the Census Bureau, you are freaked out, right? This is the last thing you want to be dealing with. And yet, I was at an Esri conference last summer and tried to ask a person, something about it, sort of a scientist, and you could tell they have been gotten to. So I don't have a good answer for that, but that's the very thing the Complete Count Committee, our elected official Bruce Elfont, who's part of that core team, that's his number one question. What are the logistics? So I apologize, I can't answer it fully, but again, it goes back to if it's an incomplete form, that gives them an invitation to come and knocking.
You did go over the number of foreign-born during your presentation, correct? How could this citizen question, i.e. a lack of response, affect the population estimates for Austin or the Austin metropolitan statistical area? Well, you think that using your SWAMI demographic powers?
So if we have a big undercount of foreign-born, my numbers are going to be off, right? I'm convinced that we're going to get really, really close to 1 million at the city level. I'm not sure we'll get up and above it, but if we were to have a big undercount, we won't even be close to that. And so you'll see it in the result. When we get the result back in February of 2021, we'll know pretty quickly. And so it'd be devastating for my numbers. We have a large foreign-born population, and were they to not be counted fully, our numbers are going to look really strange, both at the city level and at the metropolitan level, and especially at the state level, right? It only gets more intense as you go into the valley, and this issue where, I didn't point it out, but Hidalgo County, right? 50% of the population in Hidalgo County is associated with an immigrant foreign-born family.
I have two questions that are very similar. Based on current growth rates, growth projections, how many people do you estimate will be living in the city of Austin 10 years from now?
10 years from now,
You have to give to the single digit a correct answer.
Thank you. So a million by 2020 and then 1.3 million by 2030. I think that the city's growth has slowed. We've demonstrated that. Last year, almost 80% of total population growth within the MSA occurred outside the city. I don't think that trend is going to change all that much. So about 1.3.
Okay. With the fact that we are living longer, do you see the 2020 census changing its standards, age range for seniors 65 plus, possibly age categories 66 to 75, 76 to 85, and so on?
Well,
and then my mother's 89. I don't know if she likes that or not.
So from the decennial, you'll have single year cohorts. And so I think the single-year cohorts stop at 95. I don't think there'll be a change for this decennial. But if folks start living more regularly to 110, they're going to have a single-year cohort for that. But this time, I don't think there'll be a change. But we are experiencing huge growth in older baby boomers and seniors. I'm convinced that we've become a destination city for retirees. What it means to retire is changing.
And again, that was for 2020. Do you think 10 years from now?
10 years from now will be a different story because we'll have a much larger share of us will be north of 65. But will there be a change in how we count? I'm not so sure.
Okay.
I'm not so sure.
Why is it easier to know how many newcomers migration into Austin, but we can't keep tabs on how many move out of Austin each day?
It's just administratively more difficult.
Yeah, that there's not an office of I'm leaving Austin. Please report here.
I wish there were because I want to
ask
tell
me that you're leaving on what day.
Wouldn't that be awesome?
And come there and sign in.
Yeah. And we joke about that, but I'd love that. I mean, because I'd like to know. Okay, Austin didn't live up to its hype. What's the deal? Where are you going? So it's just administratively more difficult, but you could begin to sort of do exit surveys, but I don't have a handle on that now.
What'd be a cool idea is they go to the visitors bureau and they're the anti-visitor and they have to sign out when they're leaving. What specific efforts are being designed to ensure all individuals who are homeless are counted? This is important to bring in more money to address this priority issue.
Yeah, no, we're going to throw everything we have at it. It's going to be all hands on deck. I didn't mention it, but Alan Graham himself, the saint, he is on our complete count committee. It's going to be an information. We're going to work with area constables. We're going to give them information about camp locations. We'll throw everything we have at it, but again, it's going to be a real challenge.
Let's see. Any projections about the growth of the senior population?
Yeah, what people refer to as the silver tsunami.
The silver tsunami.
The silver tsunami. So we will begin to age in place as a metropolitan area about 10 years from now. But before then, the bulk of our growth in seniors will come from migration. And again, I think we've become a destination city for retirees. But 15 years from now, you'll really begin to see that aging piece of the population.
We're plowing through these very quickly. Talk more about demographic change in East Austin. Are the trends steady or varying from that part 20 years? I don't know if that's in the purview. Do you have anything to say about that? Or
what I would say that for those of us who have been here a long time, I'm surprised that it took as long as it did for East Austin to begin to change as rapidly as it did. And it's been a fascinating sort of piece of our planning history because in my mind, kind of the city has had its foot on the gas pedal and its foot on the brake at the same time. We began to mitigate environmental factors in the 90s. We closed the tank farm. finally closed Holly. You basically open up this awesome piece of real estate that's sitting right next to downtown, and I'm not trying to just talk about it in pure numbers form, but East Austin has changed even more than I thought it was going to. It will be a serious factor when we get data back from 2020 and redraw those council districts. Because District 1, which of course is our African American Impact District, as the best I can calculate it now, African Americans are in third position behind non-Hispanic whites and behind Hispanics, and that will only be exacerbated. So there'll be issues like that. I mean, East Austin is, you probably have an East Austin in every vibrant American city. The displacement has been intense. It's very difficult to measure where displacement goes, right? You can sort of see where displacement is sourced from, right? When you demolish an older market rate affordable housing apartment project on Riverside, you can say, wow, there are 220 households were just displaced, but where do they go? That's a far more difficult thing to measure and know. And we've put energy into it, but we don't have a good answer.
Is the growth rate of our African American community from our traditional African American community or new people coming in?
No, it's migration. Yeah, I mean, but again, we're in positive territory.
And then where originally did our original African American community go to from East Austin?
Oh, okay. So,
and so the new people or the people there, are they the original or those new people? And then where did the original? We had a fairly large African American community on the east side. Where did they go?
Okay, now I'm understanding that. So as African American households began leaving East Austin in the 90s, that was really, I would argue, a story of economic empowerment. Today, it's very much a story of displacement. But in the 90s, African American families, as they reached middle class, they said, we're out of here. And they moved, in many cases, to Pflugerville and Round Rock. They got more house for the value. They moved to a school district that was far more equitable. And then, and this is where a little supposition on my part, I think that part of that was a rejection of a highly, highly segregated urban enclave. Now, that story of economic empowerment has very much changed to a story of economic displacement. But there aren't that many African American families left in East Austin to be displaced. And so that, if that's the kind of thing that you get to. But it's certainly something we spend a lot of time mapping, talking about, and trying to get our brain around.
What efforts are in place to prevent census scamming, i.e. people posing as census takers and getting personal information?
That's always going to be an issue. They haven't really told us yet that we're going to have some identification. There'll be a bag, but people love to scam. So that will be, but I don't think that will be necessarily any worse this time around. I could be wrong about that, but they will put in place sort of mechanisms where you can be sure that you're talking to, an official census person. I hope that they'll put those in place.
This is an interesting question. How will people with Alzheimer's in facilities be counted by family members? What if they don't have family? How will people in prisons be counted?
Yeah, and that has always been a challenge. Those are what are known as group quarters populations. And so in the case of a skilled nursing facility, we will have a group quarters form that will go, and it will be the responsibility of the administration. We will do outreach and communication. Incarcerated individuals are also a group quarters population, and they'll be counted in a similar way. Same with dormitories, some other group quarters. So it's a challenge, but again, that's on us to provide the Bureau with a location of where group quarters exist, whether it be incarcerated individuals or folks in skilled nursing. But there are methods for counting those folks. And it's not, in the case of the Alzheimer's, it's not on them. They're not going to have to be self-responsible for that.
And on a related note, I had a question. Can people who have been formally be incarcerated, who are felon, anywhere from misdemeanor to a felon, once they've served, be eligible to vote? I mean, can they vote?
I don't know. Now, I want to count them, and someone might in the crowd might be able to field that. I think there's a state-to-state variation in terms of if felons can vote. Anybody? Okay, good. Thank you for that.
Anna, could you say what she said?
Yeah, so you have to, so they're saying yes in the affirmative, but it has to be a full completion of that term. But again, I'm in no way an expert on that. Can you take a microphone?
If they've served their probation.
Thank you. Thank you, Margaret.
Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, thanks.
This is again, you're projecting into the future. What will be Texas and Austin's response if the Supreme Court decision, the citizen question, will be required?
We've got a press release ready to go. We've got with the mayor's signature on it and Judge Eckhart, the co-chairs of our Complete Count Committee. And it basically will be saying, we'll be crying foul. We're saying we don't agree with this, that we think this is a bad idea, but we have press releases at the ready.
I don't know if you can answer this one. How much of Austin's housing is functioning as second homes or vacation homes, and i.e. that the homes are not rented out and the owner is not homesteading or voting here?
Yeah. So that's interesting. I think we've got a couple of things going on. We've got it's not deep yet, but I think what I would call the Upper East Side phenomenon, where the rich and famous own units, right? Maybe Dan Rather owns a unit, but he doesn't necessarily live here all the time. So I think that as we're a bigger and bigger city, we're having more of that. We've also got and this is my professional opinion, the scourge of the short-term rental unit type 2. Little miniature hotels sitting out in our neighborhoods. Why in the world we allow that at all? It just blows me away, because they're a real problem. They can cluster and they flourish and they displace regular residents, and so that's increasing, and that will also add complexity to the census, no doubt about it. People living in RVs, right? All of this different type of living arrangement, that's going to be not impossible, but it adds complexity and it adds difficulty.
We've been asking questions for 25 minutes. How about another 5 minutes?
Okay.
Can you do it? Okay.
Q&A is tough for me.
This is a good one. In 27, you wrote that the region outside the city limits was growing at the rate of 34%, while the area inside the city limits was growing at 20%. Today, are these the growth rates the same, or have they changed?
Roughly the same. I mean, roughly the same. And the simple story there is the MSA growth has spread out across the MSA. Suburban communities are adding tons and tons of households, and that's a function of housing. I mean, it's the housing markets in Buda and Kyle and northern Hayes and Williamson and parts of Bastrop and northwest Travis are cranking out thousands of housing units each year, and they're being easily filled with incoming households. So those growth rates about the same. And again, that's what we're eager to recalibrate when we get decennial data back. We'll take another look at those forecasts. But we've been amazingly on track. The original forecast that we created for Imagine Austin, we feel that with a few exceptions, we're kind of where we thought we'd be.
I'm going to ask 3 more questions, and you're off the hook. Are there strategies / options for accurately counting LGBTQ plus populations with 2020 census form?
Yeah, what I can say is that we've got an LGBTQ component to our Complete Count Committee. We have a very active LGBTQ commission with the city. We will be leaning on those folks. So we're aware, and we'll put together a campaign, but beyond that, I don't know specifics. But it's on our radar. We feel that they're a hard-to-count community, and we feel it's a large community here in Austin. It's also a community you don't have much data for. I'd love to see something more specific in the census data to help us get our arms around just how big and diverse that community is. and I'm hopeful that that we'll begin to see American Community Survey questions in the future that will help us obtain that specificity.
Will ICE be able to access census information to locate undocumented and or non-citizens?
Well, technically, no, right? Technically, no. The data are protected by Title 13 confidentiality, but that's not what worries me. What worries me as a demographer and a cartographer is if you've got citizenship at the block level, right? You know, you could easily, someone with rudimentary GIS skills could take that and then pull out, right? You know where the legal, so-called, I hate that term, the legal immigrants are, but folks here with documentation, because you have addresses for those folks. So you could very quickly identify where clusters of non-citizens are without question. And so do I think ICE might be up to no good? Absolutely yes. And I'm professionally worried about that.
What level, this is the last question, thank you. What level of demographic impact do we expect to see from increasing climate change problems, disasters, such as displacement from floods and droughts?
I think it simply adds to our long-term growth for Austin. I'm not saying we're going to be a coastal city, but we could be a near coastal city. And to me, the scenarios I've seen is it just inflates our future growth.
Well, you did an awesome job. You answered about 25 questions. Thank you, everyone, for coming to the Imagine Austin Speaker Series. And the survey is right over there. If you would fill it out, it takes 1 minute. And if you have suggestions for our next speaker series, please put that at the bottom and say, I want to hear about this subject or that, or from this person. And I'll do the best that I can. I've been doing this about 6 years. And thank you for coming. We had a great audience.